Next, I want to create a basic vocal sound. And the reason I'm starting with the vocals is that the song really centers around the vocals. So I want to get that right first, at least a good starting point, and then build around it, where we can always check the lead vocal with any sound we bring in. But before we do that, I want to create some alternate memory locations that we can use to just view certain tracks, which will make it easier to jump back and forth between all our tracks and just the vocal. So let's first go down here and make a vocal track a bit bigger, just so it stands out. Then I'm going to create a marker by hitting enter. But instead of choosing a marker over here, let's choose none and add in the options track visibility and track heights. So it's going to save those two things when we recall this memory location. It's set up to 11, and let's name it all tracks. Hit OK. And now let's hide all our tracks except for the vocal. We'll first select all our tracks, hold an Alt on the PC, Option on the Mac, and just click any track. It selects them all. Then we'll hold down Control on the PC or Command on the Mac and deselect the vocal. Then right-click over here and hide all these tracks. So we just see the vocal. Let's make it bigger, like that. Zoom in a bit and hit markers again. This time it goes to 12. Choose none. Let's add in the zoom settings along with the track visibility and the track heights. And we'll name this lead vocal. Save it. And if we want to recall those memory locations, we could type in decimal 11 decimal to see all the tracks and still see the vocal nice and big, or type in decimal 12 decimal to just see the vocal. And if we could remember those numbers, we could jump back and forth very quickly. All tracks, just the vocal. So if we're working on the vocal, it's a lot easier just to choose it using that marker. So let's zoom in a bit closer and solo this vocal.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind.
Let's get a basic vocal sound. Now I call it a basic vocal sound because it's not the final one. We can still tweak it along the way and probably once again at the end. But if we get it most of the way there, like 75%, it'll make things so much easier as we build around the vocal. So I like to focus on three main areas. For EQ, I like to start with cutting any low end. Then I'll compress with a compressor. And then finally, add some more EQ on the top end, where I'd probably boost. So let's start by cutting some low end. Let's go to the track effects, go to the EQ, and choose EQ3 7-band. Then I'll turn on the low filter or high pass filter, filter at 18 dB, and bring it up to cut off any low end rumble.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
That sounds pretty good around there. There's not a lot of rumble on this track, but the next area I want to work on is mud. The lower mids. If the vocal sounds muddy, we want to cut it out so the vocal cuts through our track. So let's find that frequency.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind.
And we can adjust the bandwidth or how wide we're cutting, start on the PC or Control on the Mac, and we can adjust how wide that cut is.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find. I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
That's pretty good around there. Now let's add a compressor to control the level of the vocal, so it's not too dynamic, where you hear it getting too loud or too low in the mix. so we'll add it after the EQ. Dynamics, Dynamic 3 compressor. And I'm going to adjust the ratio to about 4:1, bring the knee up a bit, make it sound smoother, the attack a little slower, and the release a little slower. Let's hear what it sounds like as we adjust the threshold. And watch the gain reduction right here.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
I usually want to keep it between 0 and -3, so it's not pumping too much.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
And then finally, we'll add an EQ after this to boost the upper mids or high end. EQ, EQ3, 7-band. And we'll focus on the upper mids and the top end, which is a shelving EQ. So it's going to boost from this frequency all the way up.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
Before,
I've got scars on my skin. I've got scars on my skin.
we're boosting about 2 dB at about 1.8 kilohertz. Then the high shelving is at 5 kilohertz, and we're boosting about 4 dB.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
Now, there's a feature in Pro Tools where we can bypass all the effects on a selected track just by hitting a keystroke. So let's select this, hit Shift-A, and it bypasses them all.
I've got scars on my skin.
And if we hit it again, it turns them back on.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
Let's hear it in the track.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
That sounds pretty good. Now let's add some time-based effects to the vocal, like reverb and echo. Let's go back to all the tracks. Let's go to the send on the vocal track, right here. And let's create a new track that we could send to. We'll make it mono, aux input, and name it reverb or vocal verb, because we're going to use it on vocals. And that creates this track we could use as an effects return. So let's add a reverb to it. We'll choose Deverb Mono Stereo. So it's a mono send, which is going to be a stereo effect. Then we'll choose a plate, make it a bit bigger, and change the pre-delay to be 90 milliseconds. So there'll be a slight delay before we hear the reverb. Makes it sound bigger. And now let's hear what it sounds like when we add the reverb to our vocal.
I've got scars on my skin.
But right now we're not hearing it because we soloed the vocal. So we should use a feature called Solo Safe. If you hold down Control on the PC or Command on the Mac and hit the solo button on the effect return or the reverb, it keeps it soloed even if we don't solo that track. So we're still going to hear the reverb even if this track isn't soloed.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
Let's hear it in the track.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
Makes it sound bigger and more spacious. Now let's add an echo or delay to this as well. And we'll do it the same way. We'll choose our send on the vocal, go to new track, mono, aux input, and name it echo. I'm going to go to this track and add a delay plugin. Mod delay, mono, stereo. So again, it's a mono send to a stereo effect. And we'll set this up for the left side to be 180 milliseconds and the right side to be 300. So it'll create a stereo effect. And we could send it from here. But once again, let's solo safe the echo. We could solo the vocal and still hear the echo.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
That's a bit dramatic, so we're probably not going to use it through the whole song. Let's just hear it.
I've got scars on my skin and in my mind. I've seen things that I hope you can't find.
We can use a bit less, or just turn it off for certain sections and turn it on for others. Like maybe leave it on for the chorus and leave it off for the verse. We could decide that later. For now, I'm pretty happy with where the vocal is sitting, and we could build a mix around it and feel comfortable that the vocal is always going to sound good in the mix. So let's move on to the rest of the tracks.